Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. On December 1st, 2005, 7-year-old Yuki Yoshida, a first-grade student at Osawa Elementary School in Nikko City, Tochigi Prefecture, Japan, suddenly disappeared while walking home from school. A day later, her body was discovered in a forest in Hitachi-Omiya City, Ibaraki Prefecture, about 40 miles from her home. When found, the child's body was completely naked, with multiple stab wounds to her chest. Forensic experts determined the cause of death to be excessive blood loss from sharp force injuries to the chest. Blood from the wounds had spread out in a circular pattern around the body, indicating that the girl had been killed while lying on her back. Notably, there was very little blood at the scene, and all of the girl's clothing and personal belongings from when she disappeared were nowhere to be found. From these details, police theorized that the forest where the body was discovered was likely not the primary crime scene. The killer had probably murdered the girl at a different location before transporting her body to the remote forest to dispose of it. Facing this serious case, police from Tochigi and Ibaraki prefectures quickly formed a special investigative team and conducted a coordinated investigation. A witness reported seeing a suspicious white car in the area around 3 p.m. on the day the girl disappeared, driven by a young man. The difficulty was that the school area where the incident occurred was in a remote location with few passers-by and no surveillance camera system. With only 2 vague leads, a white car and a young driver, investigators could barely identify the suspicious vehicle. Despite thoroughly searching along nearby national highways and questioning owners of roadside stores, police made little progress. The murder weapon, along with the victim's backpack, clothes, and personal items, remained missing. A careful investigation of people around the girl also failed to identify any suspicious individuals connected to the case. The investigation dragged on for a year with few breakthroughs. In August 2006, investigators announced a reward for anyone providing important clues about the case. Initially set at approximately $20,000, it was later increased to about $50,000, but even this failed to produce useful information. As time passed, hopes of finding the killer grew increasingly dim. Then in April 2014, when the case had been open for 8 years and was nearly forgotten by the public, Tochigi Prefecture Police suddenly announced they had solved the murder case, and a suspect was in custody. The suspect was Takuya Katsumata, 32, a Taiwanese man who had obtained Japanese citizenship 2 years earlier. Notably, Takuya was initially arrested on completely unrelated charges, selling counterfeit goods with his mother. After being detained for over 20 days, Takuya admitted to kidnapping and assaulting little Yuki, but insisted he didn't kill her. A suspicious detail was that this confession wasn't recorded on video, contrary to standard investigative procedures for serious cases. In June 2016, after a long period of detention, Takuya finally confessed to killing Yuki, nearly 6 months after his initial arrest. 2 weeks after this confession, he signed an official admission of guilt and detailed the entire crime. Armed with this confession, prosecutors immediately used it as key evidence and charged him with premeditated murder. In February 2016, the Utsunomiya District Court officially began the trial. Prosecutors confidently presented the confession statement along with various circumstantial evidence, seeming almost certain of victory. However, an unexpected situation occurred. When the court accepted the confession and asked if Takuya had any comments, the normally quiet and reserved defendant suddenly retracted his entire previous statement. With a face that seemed to have summoned all his courage, his usually avoidant eyes now shining with sadness and anger, Takuya spoke up. He declared that he had been continuously pressured by the police for an extended period, forced to confess and sign the statement against his will. In reality, he asserted he was completely innocent, had not committed the crime, and knew nothing about the case. From that moment of first retracting his statement, Takuya no longer seemed afraid and began making every effort to clear his name. From this point, the prosecution and defense began a legal battle that would last for years, with complex and controversial developments. Had Takuya truly been tortured into a confession? What evidence did the prosecution have to identify him as the killer? And what would the district court's verdict be? These were the key questions in this case. Takuya was born in 1982 in Taipei, in a Taiwanese family. His life took many turns when his parents divorced, and his mother remarried a Japanese man. While in 6th grade, he followed his mother to Japan and changed his name to Takuya, a distinctly Japanese name. Takuya's integration process in the new country faced many challenges. Due to language barriers and poor Japanese skills, he was frequently bullied by classmates at school. His relationship with his stepfather was also not close, partly because Takuya was already 12 when his mother remarried, an age when personality is already formed and adapting to new parents is difficult. After completing junior high school, Takuya decided to drop out. He left his stepfather's home, choosing independence by renting a small room to live alone. The hardships of his formative years shaped Takuya's closed-off, solitary character as an adult. He rarely socialized, had few friends, and was typically very quiet. His only known hobby was collecting anime figurines, a fairly common interest in Japanese culture. Some media reports claimed that after his arrest, police discovered a large amount of child pornography and incest content on his computer. This information, if true, seemed to reinforce the hypothesis about his pedophilic motives for the crime, although this later became a contentious point in the case. At the trial, the prosecution and defense presented completely opposing arguments about the case. According to prosecutors, Takuya had been carrying guilt for many years about the crime he committed. They claimed that after his arrest, he quickly confessed to killing Yuki 8 years earlier. The prosecutor emphasized that Takuya had voluntarily described the details of the crime and signed the confession of his own free will, showing remorse. However, Takuya told an entirely different story. According to his testimony in court, he was initially arrested on charges of selling counterfeit goods, a crime completely unrelated to Yuki's case. He recounted that after his arrest, police suddenly shifted the investigation and began pressuring him to admit to harming Yuki. Takuya claimed that he initially firmly denied any connection to the case. However, under constant police pressure during lengthy interrogations, in his first confession, he reluctantly admitted to sexual assault, but still denied murder. Notably, he alleged that police were unsatisfied with this statement and thus did not turn on the camera to record it, a detail that raised serious doubts about the transparency of the interrogation process. The complete difference between these two versions of events raised serious questions about the authenticity of the confession and the police methods of gathering evidence in the case. Takuya described the subsequent interrogation process as a form of psychological torture. According to his testimony, whenever he stated, "I did not kill the girl," the interrogator would immediately react by shouting and slamming a folder on the table, creating loud noises to exert psychological pressure. Particularly serious was the allegation that police forced him to repeat the sentence, "I'm very sorry I killed Yuki 50 times each day, and if he didn't complete this quota, he would be denied food and drink for the day." Under such high intensity and prolonged psychological pressure, Takuya testified that his mental state severely deteriorated. Although he still tried to deny the accusations many times, each attempt was met with threats from the interrogator. Finally, after nearly 6 months of enduring constant pressure from the police, he claimed he was completely exhausted and surrendered, confessing to the entire case exactly as the police suggested and signing the confession statement. From an objective perspective, Takuya's confession contained many illogical points. Notably, even the Japanese press recognized suspicious signs. The Sankei Shimbun, a respected Japanese newspaper, reported on Takuya's interrogation. In one report, the newspaper described, "Police used an imposing, forceful tone to pressure Takuya, saying, 'You must tell me today.' As for Takuya, he showed extremely unstable emotions, head bowed, body shaking violently, finally suddenly shouting, 'I can't take it anymore. I can't stand these things anymore.'" These descriptions seem to confirm that during the interrogation, Takuya had indeed experienced a state of crisis and serious mental breakdown, a situation that could lead to making a false statement to escape the pressure. The timeline of the confessions further increased doubts about their authenticity. From January 2014, when he was arrested, until before the trial, Takuya had confessed 3 separate times, but notably, Two of these occurred when police had turned off the recording camera, a detail that raised serious suspicions about the interrogation process. According to the police, Takuya immediately confessed to the crime on the first day of his arrest on counterfeit goods charges. However, the truth was that he endured exactly 140 days in detention before officially signing the confession statement. During this long, grueling period, his mental state had deteriorated to the point where he even considered suicide. This unusual timeline raised many questions. If Takuya truly wanted to confess from the beginning, as police claimed, why did it take more than 3 months for him to sign the confession statement? This time, Gap aligned more reasonably with Takuya's allegations that he had been coerced over an extended period. More importantly, the content of Takuya's confession contained many serious contradictions with the crime scene evidence. According to his statement, he drove his white car, forcing the girl to his rented apartment in Kanuma City. There, he claimed to have touched the girl's body and even kissed her forehead. Next, he admitted to sexually assaulting her in a non-penetrative way. The statement continued, describing that around 4 a.m. the next morning, he used tape to cover her eyes and mouth so she couldn't scream, and shocked her once with a stun gun. He then drove her to the forest, where he held her shoulders and stabbed her to death, quickly leaving the scene for fear of being discovered. These details, though specific, contradicted much of the forensic and crime scene evidence, raising questions about whether the confession was truth or merely the result of prolonged psychological pressure. When analyzing Takuya's statement carefully, many serious issues with details emerged, creating contradictions with forensic evidence that were difficult to explain. First was the DNA issue. According to his statement, Takuya and Yuki had intimate physical contact, including kissing and ejaculation. These acts should have left clear biological traces. However, notably, no DNA from Takuya was found on the girl's body, a significant omission that the prosecution could not adequately explain. Second was the contradiction about the time of death. Takuya stated that he killed the girl around 4 a.m. the morning after the kidnapping. However, the forensic report, based on the state of food digestion in the victim's stomach and other cadaveric signs, had determined the time of death could be from 4 p.m. on the day of disappearance to 2 a.m. the following morning. This discrepancy was not minor, and notably, the prosecution offered no explanation for this timing inconsistency. Third, and perhaps most seriously, were contradictions related to the crime scene and injury mechanism. Takuya stated that he committed the murder in the forest, meaning the place where the body was discovered was the primary crime scene. However, this completely contradicted the forensic conclusion. If the forest was truly the primary scene, why was so little blood found there? Furthermore, Takuya described the process of the crime as holding the girl's shoulders and stabbing her. According to this description, the girl was stabbed in a standing position, so blood should have flowed downward with gravity. However, the forensic report clearly indicated that the blood stains on the body spread out in a circular pattern, proving the victim had been killed while lying on her back, a fundamental contradiction about the injury mechanism that could not be ignored. These inconsistencies raised serious doubts about the reliability of the confession. A most important omission in Takuya's statement was that he made no mention of disposing of the girl's clothes. According to his statement, after the killing, he simply left because he feared being discovered. This is a suspicious blind spot, because an important detail in the case was that the girl was found completely naked. This omission in the statement seemed to prove that Takuya truly didn't know about the condition of the body when it was found, something an actual perpetrator should have known. The defense emphasized that the contradictions and omissions in the statement showed this was not a voluntary confession based on actual knowledge of the crime, but rather seemed like a script suggested to Takuya by the police. They argued that the statement had so many points that didn't match the crime scene reality that it couldn't be used as reliable incriminating evidence. For a long time, both prosecution and defense maintained their positions, leading to ongoing debates with no conclusion. The important question arose: beyond this controversial confession, did the prosecution hold any other decisive evidence? Clearly, when bringing the case to court, the prosecution couldn't rely solely on a statement full of holes. During the trial, they confidently presented some additional evidence they considered important. First, according to witness descriptions, the person who kidnapped the girl drove a white car, and Takuya also owned a white car. Second, the road surveillance system after the incident had captured images of his car appearing on a road near the crime scene. Third, police had found a stun gun at Takuya's home, and they claimed its size matched a wound on the girl's body. Finally, some cat hairs were found on the girl's body, and Takuya had previously owned a cat. Upon examination, the cat hair found on the body and the cat he had owned were determined to be of the same breed. When examined carefully, the evidence presented by the prosecution was actually just circumstantial evidence, with no element that could directly prove a connection between Takuya and the crime. At trial, the defense team made sharp rebuttals to each piece of evidence. Regarding the white car evidence, the defense lawyer pointed out an obvious fact. In Japan alone, an estimated 10 million white cars were in circulation. Takuya owning a white car was completely insufficient to establish a connection to the case. Additionally, the only witness who confirmed the white car was a 7-year-old elementary school student, a child the same age as the victim. Research on memory has proven that children's identification and memory of details are often unreliable, especially in stressful situations. Therefore, this evidence had virtually no significant legal value. Regarding the traffic camera evidence, the prosecution alleged that Takuya's car had been caught on camera near the crime scene, inferring that he had driven to the forest to dispose of the body. However, the defense countered by presenting an accurate map, proving that the location where the defendant's car was recorded was actually several miles from the crime scene, couldn't be considered near by any reasonable standard. Moreover, the traffic camera images only captured Takuya's car on a very short road segment. This was completely insufficient to prove the complete route of the car, the final destination, or the defendant's purpose for traveling at that time. There was no evidence showing the car had entered the forest area where the body was discovered. To counter the cat hair evidence, the defense team invited a credible expert, a professor from Kyoto University, specializing in the relevant field. This professor provided a scientific explanation that the prosecution found difficult to refute. According to the professor, in a specific geographical area, domesticated cats tend to belong to certain common breeds. He pointed out that the probability of any two cats in the same area belonging to the same breed could be as high as 20%, a significant proportion. Therefore, the fact that the cat hair on the body and Takuya's cat were of the same breed was not a rare coincidence, but something entirely possible according to normal probability. Regarding the stun gun issue, one of the evidence pieces the prosecution considered important, the defense lawyer presented a sharp analysis based on forensic science. They pointed out that wounds caused by stun guns typically leave characteristic electrical burn marks on skin and tissue, but the wounds on Yuki's body completely lacked these signs. More importantly, in the official forensic report, the wound that the prosecution claimed was caused by a stun gun had been identified by the examiner as merely an abrasion, completely unrelated to electrical injury. This strongly proved that Yuki had likely never been attacked with a stun gun, as stated in the confession. The defense team argued that the investigation had proceeded in the opposite direction of the normal scientific process. The prosecution had found an unidentified wound on the victim's body, then found a stun gun at Takuya's home, and automatically connected these two elements without scientific evidence. Then, they had suggested to Takuya to add the stun gun detail to his statement. This was not only a wrong inference in a draw the target first, then shoot the arrow manner, but also indirect proof that the defendant's statement did not come from actual experience, but may have been suggested or forced by police. Throughout the argument phase, the defense team presented a coherent set of arguments with scientific basis and tight logic. They analyzed and rebutted each point in the prosecution's file with solid and persuasive reasoning. Even the court expressed recognition for the sharp and professional analyses from the defense. However, surprisingly, after the lengthy debate process, the Utsunomiya District Court still made a decision contradicting the arguments they had acknowledged. They still firmly believed the prosecution's explanation, despite its many weaknesses that had been pointed out. As a result, Takuya was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. In the verdict, the court explained that Takuya's confession had specific and authentic content, and the main content did not contradict objective facts, thus was reliable. Notably, the court even used Takuya's emotional reactions when asked important questions in the confession video as grounds for conviction, a questionable legal argument, as emotional reactions could also be expressions of psychological pressure or fear, not necessarily signs of guilt. Faced with this verdict, Takuya was completely bewildered. In his mind, a paradox appeared. The court had acknowledged the defense's arguments. The prosecution had no direct evidence proving the crime, so why was he still convicted? In court, he firmly declared he would continue to appeal. In media interviews after the trial, his eyes were filled with complex emotions: surprise, anger, and refusal to accept a system he felt had betrayed justice. Nevertheless, Takuya maintained faith in the appeal process. He believed that the district court trial, from its factual basis to its verdict logic, was unconvincing and full of holes. Not being articulate, he didn't harshly criticize the Utsunomiya District Court, but placed his hope in the appeal at the Tokyo High Court, where he believed justice would be served and his name cleared. August 3, 2018, marked the beginning of the appeal trial, the door of hope in which Takuya had placed his complete trust. However, what unfolded at this trial exceeded even his imagination about the absurdity in the justice system. In the district court trial, the issues of time and place of the crime had been fatal weaknesses in the indictment, clear contradictions with forensic evidence that the defense team had repeatedly pointed out and attacked. Right from the start of the appeal trial, the judge also seemed to notice serious shortcomings in the prosecution's evidence file. He repeatedly questioned the prosecution representative. Regarding the time and place of the murder, do you have any other evidence? Faced with these direct questions, the prosecution representative appeared visibly flustered, only able to vaguely respond, "We will go back and research further." However, the so-called further research by the prosecution was not an effort to find more factual evidence to strengthen their argument. Instead, they chose a shocking solution: directly filing an application to amend the indictment. Astonishingly, they changed their entire approach to locating the crime scene. Instead of asserting that the murder occurred in the forest where the body was discovered as in the original indictment, they expanded the scope to somewhere in the entire area of Tochigi and Ibaraki prefectures and the areas surrounding these two prefectures, a geographical range so broad as to be almost legally meaningless. Simultaneously, they also expanded the time frame of the crime from the specific point 4 a.m. the morning after the disappearance to a vague period from 2 p.m. on the day of disappearance to early the next morning, extending it to 12 hours. The purpose of doing this was nothing other than avoiding the defense lawyers continuing to find flaws about time and place. But the problem wasn't it because the defendant's car appeared near the crime scene that he was convicted in the district court trial? Now, wasn't this approach essentially saying that all white cars within the range of two prefectures were suspicious? Wasn't that admitting the defendant was innocent? What was more surprising was that the High Court judge approved this almost thuggish request from the prosecution to amend the indictment. Later, a retired judge gave a frank assessment of this. They knew that in the district court trial, the prosecution always strongly asserted the crime scene was in the forest. If the appeal trial now reverses their own argument, it means they're directly admitting the defendant is not the perpetrator. This comment sharply pointed out the core issue. Regardless of the truth, the prosecution's action of amending the indictment logically contradicted their previous argument. But the unexpected thing was that in the appeal trial, it wasn't just the prosecution contradicting themselves. On August 3, 2018, after carefully listening to arguments from both prosecution and defense, the Tokyo High Court declared the Utsunomiya District Court's verdict invalid. The reason was that relying solely on the defendant's confession as grounds for conviction violated the Japanese constitution. But the absurdity was that the judge still convicted defendant Takuya, sentencing him to life imprisonment. The astonishing basis the judge used to continue convicting Takuya was a personal letter he had written to his mother. In the letter, with a remorseful tone, he wrote, "This is something I caused, bringing trouble to you and everyone. I'm truly sorry." From this vague sentence, the prosecution interpreted that "something I caused" referred to killing Yuki. The defense team, of course, rebutted this interpretation. They asserted that the "something" Takuya mentioned in the letter was the counterfeit goods case, the original charge that got him and his mother arrested, unrelated to Yuki's case. This was a reasonable explanation, since, contextually, it was entirely natural for Takuya to feel guilty for involving his mother in the counterfeit goods case. However, the Tokyo High Court judge chose to believe the prosecution's interpretation. In his sentencing statement, the judge explained questionably, "From the defendant's apology letter, if he is not the perpetrator, there is no other explanation. Although we must abandon the district court's verdict based on circumstantial evidence, we can still determine the defendant is the perpetrator." The contradiction in the judge's reasoning was hard not to find shocking. On one hand, he rejected the district court verdict because it violated the Constitution by relying solely on the defendant's confession as grounds for conviction. On the other hand, he relied on a vague sentence in a personal letter, essentially also a form of self-confession, to maintain the criminal conclusion and keep the sentence unchanged. This behavior seemed completely contradictory to the legal perspective he had just applied. If relying solely on a confession is unconstitutional, isn't relying on a vague sentence in a personal letter interpreted as a confession any different? Don't both actions violate the same constitutional principle? This decision by the judge was almost equivalent to contradicting himself, like slapping his own face. It demonstrated a serious lack of consistency in applying the law and raised profound questions about the fairness and objectivity of the judicial process. Due to the clearly illogical behavior of both the prosecution and judge, the appeal trial of this case had no credibility and completely became a farce. After the verdict was announced, the public strongly criticized the handling of this case. Most people believed that relying entirely on circumstantial evidence for conviction was already excessive, let alone when the so-called evidence couldn't stand up to scrutiny. Due to the injustice revealed in the trial process, many protests erupted outside the courthouse, and many internal issues were also exposed. According to news reports, a small piece of tape had actually been discovered on Yuki's body, and 2 unknown DNA samples were found on the tape. One sample was confirmed to be from the examiner, who had accidentally mishandled the evidence during examination, leaving his DNA. But the other DNA sample on the tape remains unidentified to this day. Therefore, many people believe this unidentified person could be the real perpetrator. But the prosecution completely ignored this detail, insisting the real perpetrator was Takuya, and suggested this DNA sample might have been accidentally left by another examiner. In both trials, the prosecution gave people the impression they were willing to pay any price, determined to convict the defendant. And the judge's attitude was extremely ambiguous, seemingly due to some irresistible pressure, stubbornly delivering a guilty verdict. It appeared someone wanted to quickly resolve this pending case to achieve their unspoken purpose. Therefore, they chose Takuya, a person with limited Japanese proficiency and a relatively introverted personality, as a scapegoat. According to news reports, although no DNA from Takuya was found on Yuki's body, an unknown DNA sample was discovered. 3 years after the incident, this DNA sample was revealed to belong to a junior investigation team leader at that time. This was because the junior team leader had direct contact with the body when collecting evidence and accidentally left DNA. Contaminating or destroying evidence is a serious error in an investigation, but the police simply explained it as a small mistake. Even more strange was that the junior team leader who made the small mistake was rapidly promoted in a short period. By the time the case went to trial, he had already risen to the high position of criminal division chief. Why would a police officer with clear misconduct not only avoid any punishment but also be promoted at an extremely unusual speed? Combined with the abnormal phenomena appearing in both trials, it's hard not to speculate about the reason behind this. More and more people believe this was a premeditated frame-up, with cooperation from all participants. Before the district court trial began, media outlets continuously guided public opinion. When introducing Takuya, the original write-up stated he liked collecting anime figurines, but this was secretly changed to liked collecting anime figurines and various knives. Some media deliberately added a knife-collecting hobby for him, seemingly to better fit the case situation where the victim was stabbed to death. They intentionally or unintentionally wanted to imply to the public that this person was the perpetrator. Another article was completely fabricated. Some media claimed that when police arrested him, they found a large amount of child pornography and incest content on his computer. In reality, this never happened. More infuriatingly, after this article was repeatedly republished, it became, "Police found a video of Yuki being assaulted in his computer." Even Japan's official media began guiding public opinion. This arbitrary defamation became too much even for the prosecution. In the district court trial, they specifically provided an explanation. The truth of this matter was actually very easy to distinguish. If the prosecution truly had such solid evidence, they would have submitted it to the judge long ago. Why wait for media reports? After being convicted a second time, Takuya still refused to accept it and continued to appeal. 1 week after the appeal trial verdict, on August 9, 2018, he authorized members of the Japan Innocence Project to help clear his name. This case garnered immense attention from people in Japan and Taiwan who hoped for a fair verdict. Unfortunately, in March 2020, the Supreme Court of Japan still rejected Takuya's appeal, maintaining the guilty verdict. Takuya was still sentenced to life imprisonment. Such a verdict made many people sigh in disappointment. Both Takuya and his defense lawyers, in a press conference on March 6, 2020, declared that it was clearly a case with no direct evidence yet still resulting in conviction, which was unacceptable. What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.